Welcome to part 2 of using Mai Tai within Studio 1.3, and in part 2 we're going to take a look at the filter, both of the LFOs and the modulation matrix, the two panels down below here. And so let's go ahead and get started with taking a look at the filter. And I'm actually going to come up to the top and load in the default patch here. Now the filter is going to allow us to shape the frequencies of our sound, as well as provide us with controls to set how our external keyboards, velocity and keys played will affect the frequency. And of course we can bypass or activate the filter by clicking its title there. And we have 5 different filter modes to choose from at the top here. We've got a 24 dB per octave low pass, a 24 dB per octave low pass based on zero delay feedback architecture. We then have a 12 dB per octave low pass, 12 dB band pass, and 12 dB high pass. And we're going to take a look at each one of these in a second here. Next we have a soft button, which will allow us to activate a darker tone in our sound, and when this is disengaged we'll have a brighter sound. We then have our cutoff dial, of course, and this is for selecting at which frequency we'd like to place our cuts. If we're using bandpass mode, then this will be set the center frequency of the sound to be passed through the filter. So let's take a listen to how these actually function in practice. And if you're watching this, I'm assuming that you're new to synthesis and new to Mai Tai, so I'm going to cover some basics here of synthesis. If you're familiar with all of these things, then maybe you'll be reminded of some things that you forgot, or maybe you may pick up some new things that you were unaware of regarding Mai Tai and synthesis. Now let's just hear our patch as it is before we begin making any adjustments. Okay, and in order to talk about each one of these that we just mentioned, I'm going to turn some of these other parameters off to be sure that our sound is not being affected by those, and we're going to move on to those in just a second. I'd also like to disable our LFOs, our noise, and oscillator 2, our character, and let's just work with a basic waveform here. Our sawtooth is selected in oscillator 1. So the first filter type that we're working with here is the 24 dB low pass filter. So the low pass is going to allow lower frequencies to come through and cut our higher frequencies. If you notice this little icon here, which represents low pass, you can see this drop represents a cutting of high frequencies. And we then use the cutoff dial to determine at which frequency we're going to begin our cut. So we're at 20 hertz right now. So basically, that's why we have such a limited sound here. As we raise our cutoff, then say up to 176 hertz we've got there, now we're beginning to introduce more frequencies in. And that's how that low pass functions. If we were to raise this cutoff all the way up to 20 kilohertz, then we essentially have the full spectrum of human hearing. We've got all of the sound of this sawtooth waveform. So if we drop back down, then we cut. We cut those frequencies as we move our cutoff dial down. And so these next 3 are also low pass filters, you can tell by the icon, and these are just going to function a little bit differently depending on which one you choose, and they're going to have a different slope, meaning how quickly they cut the frequencies, or how drastic the frequencies are cut by octave. And the filter slopes are a bit beyond this video, but if you play around with the different types, then you'll get a better idea of what they do. Now the band pass, this is basically going to let a small band of frequencies pass through in between our low and high frequencies. So if you see this little notch here, you can think of that as, say, if you were to take, say, at the beginning of this notch, at this right angle, we've got 100 hertz, and then up here we have 400 hertz. So in between that band of frequencies, we're allowing those to pass through, and then we're cutting the frequencies below and the frequencies above that range that I just mentioned. So if we take a listen to this, our cutoff dial is then going to select that band of frequencies that we're allowing to pass through. Okay, and then next we've got a high pass. So this is going to cut low frequencies and allow higher frequencies through. So if we select this, we are at 328 hertz. So at 328 hertz, we are cutting below that and then allowing frequencies above 328 and above to pass through. The lower that we move the cutoff, then the more we're allowing the lower frequencies to come through. Moving on, we have a drive parameter, and this is a filter overdrive to add fullness and saturation to your sound. So if I lower I'm going to come back to the low pass. Okay, and then the punch parameter will allow you to add a percussive attack to each note that's played. So in this kind of default state, it's off, but as we move up, we're going to get that percussive attack. See, it's a bit softer now when it's off. And that is the punch. Now, the res or resonance will increase the gain or place an emphasis on whatever we have set as our cutoff frequency. So if and you can even see this peaking here in our spectrometer. Now, if I go ahead and sweep through the cutoff here, you're going to notice in the spectrometer that the frequencies that we move through are going to be boosted here. And that is your resonance. And next to the right, in the top right corner, we have vel or velocity. Now, the velocity parameter will let us control how the filter cutoff is affected by the hardness or softness of our keyboard playing. So set as it is in the center, we have a neutral effect, and whether we play soft or hard has no effect on the filter. But as we move the filter to the right, our cutoff frequencies will rise with higher velocities. And if we move the dial to the left, then lower velocities will lower our cutoff frequencies. So let's give a listen to this parameter and see how that works in action. So if I were in neutral at center, if I move this to the right, I'm just going to, so we can hear a drastic difference. I'll put that all the way at 100%. So now, if I'm going to take the cutoff down a little bit here. I will play two notes. The first one I'll play as soft as I can on the keyboard. The next one I will play with a harder pressure or higher velocity. And then you'll hear how the filter is going to open up on that higher velocity. So softly. And then higher velocity. And then as we move to the left, that's soft. And then as I press hard, we have nothing because we're really cutting that frequency with such a drastic setting to the velocity here. But if I raise that up a bit and then actually raise our cutoff a bit, let's try soft and then hard. So you can hear how the higher velocity is cutting those higher harmonics out. And I'll just control click to put that back. And lastly, in the filter section, we have key. And this is basically going to control the relationship of our frequencies in relation to the pitch we're playing on our keyboard. If you think of a physical instrument like a guitar or piano, when the lower notes are played on these instruments, they have a bit of a duller sound. And as you play higher notes, you have a brighter sound or more higher harmonics. So the key parameter allows us to emulate this within the Mai Tai. And so all the way to the left, it's at 0%, so we're not making use of this feature. But as it is, if I play a lower note here, you can hear we have some higher harmonics in there, as well as if I play higher. Now, if I raise this all the way up, just so we can hear clearly how this works, I'll play this lower note again, and then the higher, and you'll hear a difference in the harmonics. So the higher pitch still has some of those, it has a brighter sound, whereas the lower one has a duller sound. And so I'm going to just play this low note and take the key back to 0. You hear how we have that brighter, higher harmonics are back in there. With this disengaged, now if I turn that all the way back up, they're gone. So now let's move on to our LFOs, and I'll go ahead and close out the spectrometer. Let's get this back into full display. I'll activate LFO 1. Now, both of the LFOs have the exact same controls, so as we learn one, then we'll learn the other. Now, LFO stands for low frequency oscillator, and these are similar to oscillators 1 and 2, but the LFOs allow us to modulate various parameters within Mai Tai and work in tandem with the modulation panels. So we'll cover both at the same time, actually. And let me go ahead and open up the mod panel here. And we've got two different panels that we can choose from, mod A and mod B. And I want to be sure that we've got all of these off. So let's take a look at this mod panel really quickly. If we would like to deactivate or turn off any modulation, we have a couple of different choices. We can quickly just click this up above, and that will deactivate everything. If we'd like to remove the various settings, we can just click and then choose at the very top there and turn everything off. I'll control click to return these. I'm going to take these out of here so I can make my own settings. And we want to check mod B, nothing's set up there. So now we have a clear slate here. And we can look at the mod panel along with LFO 1. Taking a look at the top of LFO 1, we can choose from several different LFO types, including sine, sawtooth, triangle, square, and sample and hold. And each of these will have a different effect on the sound of whatever parameter we're modulating. Our rate here adjusts the speed at which our oscillator functions, and in our default patch, this is set in hertz. So we also have the option to set this to work in relation to our song tempo by activating the sync button here. And if we go ahead and activate that, we can then choose quarter notes, half notes, eighth notes, and so on. And I'll just go ahead and put this back to the default position, working in hertz. We start at 0.01 hertz and can come all the way up to 8 kilohertz. We've also got this little LED here that will give us a visual display of what sort of speed that we're working with. So let's take a look at the LFO in action. If we would like to apply this modulation to a parameter, then we need to come down to the modulation matrix. And then here we have two different drop-down menus where we can choose the LFO here. We actually have a few different options. We could choose our pitch bend, our mod wheel, aftertouch, breath control. A lot of different options here that we can choose to modulate our parameters. But we want to work with LFO1, so I'm going to choose LFO1. Now we have this active within our mod panel, and we want to tell it what parameter to modulate. And for this example, let's choose the pitch here. And we have oscillator 1 active, so let's choose oscillator 1 pitch. And as you can see here, there's a ton to choose from here. We can choose the frequencies, the envelope, attack, decay, envelope 2, envelope 3. These are over here. Both of our oscillator parameters. We can choose our noise, which is behind this menu. Our character, the sound parameter, which is this here. Filter resonance here, which we've covered. Filter cutoff dial. So there's tremendous possibilities here for tweaking your sounds. But we're going to work with the oscillator 1 pitch. So I'll go ahead and select that. Now we have a sine set up. So as I play, our sine should modulate the pitch at a 0.01 hertz. So that's not really going to be audible because it's such a low rate. But as I move up, oh, this is an important thing. I'm glad that you see this. It's not enough to just come in and choose these. We also have this level control where we can control the rate that is being applied to our parameter. So we do need to move this either to the right or to the left. Basically, this is going to alter the polarity depending on which end we move to. But now that we have raised this adjustment up, I can then play back. And you can hear that the sound, the pitch modulation matches exactly along with the lead, which, you know, as I mentioned, gives us a visual representation of kind of the speed or frequency that we're working with. Okay, and then we can come in and choose a different LFO type. Here's a sawtooth. And you can really hear a sonic representation of this sawtooth when we have this set at at this particular rate. Our triangle. Our square. And then sample and hold. Okay, and once again, the sync here is going to allow us to match up our LFO with the tempo of the song. So now that we've got sync, we're set at 120 beats per minute. So actually, if I turn on the click track, it's actually already on. I'll press the space bar. So if I have this on quarter, then this should come right along with the click track. Especially the square. And we've got a time delay that was turned on, and we'll talk about that in a second, but now if I take that off, but anyhow, I'm trying to stay on task. I get lost in this, so forgive me. Let's stop that and move on here. Next, we have key. Now, key is only going to be available if we have deactivated sync. So if I turn sync on, then we cannot use key. But if I go ahead and deactivate that and use key, this will basically adjust our oscillation based on the pitch or whatever key we're playing on our keyboard. So lower keys, we're going to have a lower modulation. Higher notes that we play will have a faster modulation. So let's try a sine. Let me raise up the rate a bit. Now I'll play a higher pitch on the keyboard. And you can hear how that modulation plays back much quicker. If I come up, so that is the key parameter. And if I go ahead and disengage that, next we have free. With free engaged, then our modulation is, whenever we play a note, it's just going to pick up that modulation wherever it is. When this is disengaged, then it starts the modulation over with each note that we play. So I'll go ahead and play back with it disengaged. So you can hear the modulation starts with each note. Now if I turn on free, then the modulation is just going to continue on, and with each note that I play, I pick it up at wherever it is. I'll turn this back off. And that is the free. And lastly, we have delay. So the delay will simply, we can choose between 0 milliseconds and 2 seconds as when we would like for our modulation to be introduced to the note that we're playing. So let me kick this up a little bit and let's choose a different, let's come to the square. So we have an immediate modulation is whenever we trigger a note on our keyboard. If I were to increase the delay, then we're going to get our straight note, and after 870 milliseconds, we're going to have the modulation introduced. Okay, and again, we can come all the way up to 2 seconds. And that is our delay. Again, this is something, I mean, there's tremendous possibilities with working with all of these parameters, and you can come up with all sorts of sounds and flowing modulations, especially when using LFO 1 and 2 together. Also, notice that we have 2 different drop-down menus for each of these, and how we can use this is, say if I come to the second one here, and from the drop-down menu I choose the mod wheel. In this instance, our LFO will no longer alter the pitch until we actually use our mod wheel. So if I go ahead and play back, I want my pitch bend actually. So as I adjust the pitch bend on my external keyboard controller, it's then going to introduce that LFO1 modulation to our sound. Now if I close out of the matrix panel and open up the keyboard, we can see that clearly here. Okay, and I think we've kind of reached the end of our video here. We've talked about LFOs, the modulation matrix, and there's plenty that you can explore and play around with and experiment with here, because we've got two different panels. And so just go to town, and I hope that you picked up some useful tools from this. And in part 3, we will go ahead and take a look at the ADSR envelopes, as well as all of the different effects that are available to us within the 2 effects panels down below.